It's Thursday, June 13th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show. It is a hell of a day to talk ball, and joining me to do just that is Jorge Martin. Jorge, buddy, it's been too long. What's going on, man?
Oh man, todo bien, Mateo. Thank you for having me. This is awesome. This is really just kind of like the comeback. You know, OTAs and mini camps are winding up, and it's supposed to be that dead period, but this is really the time that we're gonna learn some things, and I think we're getting ready. I'm getting pumped. I've been doing enough baseball already that I'm kind of good. I feel like I've been cheating on football for a while, but no, I'm back. I'm ready to move back into the house.
Hey, we're ready to have you back in the house, buddy. And I'm happy that you're back on the show, man, because you're here on a great day, because this is when we kick off our Flip the Script series. Like you said, Jorge, it is. Look, I know that there's OTAs and mini camps, and people are already kind of starting to parse practice clues and coach peak stuff. I mean, I get it, but this is still the dog days of summer. Nothing real is really happening. When we get to training camp, that's when things will be more important. That's when we'll be dived into all that stuff. But for right now, we're just kind of right on the precipice of when the NFL starts to go dormant. Teams close OTAs and mini camps, all that, and then they come back for training camps in mid-July. But this podcast never slows down. That is why we are bringing back the Flip the Script series. For those of you new to the series that didn't listen last year, basically, we're taking a look back at the biggest fantasy surprises and disappointments of the 2023 NFL season, and we're going to try to identify who we think could be this year's version of that. Now, a couple caveats I want folks to understand before we dive into this. I kind of think the whole, who's going to be this year's analysis is stupid. So this is a perfect June series because it's all kind of a little bit of tongue-in-cheek. It's a little bit like we're trying to find a template here. Like, for example, we're going to do a who is this year's Puka Nacua. Spoiler alert, there isn't going to be one. Okay, there's not going to be exactly a day 3 rookie, I think, that goes on and has a top 10 fantasy season breaks record, all that stuff. I get it. It's just more about, again, trying to use the template of what Puka's season was and try to identify something close, something akin to that sort of surprise. Again, for today's episode, we are focusing on who's this year's David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. There's not going to be an exact situation like that, but we're looking for kind of two guys in the same backfield who can give you usable weeks in fantasy. Are they both going to be top 15 backs? Probably not. I mean, probably the best candidate for who's going to be this year's David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs is probably David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, honestly. But we're going to try to dive a little bit deeper than that and try to find some examples for how we can give people some parameters to look for with these fantasy surprises. So, Jorge, all those caveats, does that make sense?
Oh, it makes sense. And I'm pumped for it. And I feel kind of like, a producer Colin asked to make sure I kept my list secret. I feel like it's one of those Andy Behrens episodes where you guys keep the secrets from each other. And it's, I'm pumped for this. That made me double the preparation because I had to make sure I had enough to cover in case you sniped me on any of these tandems.
Oh, yeah. I guarantee there's going to be some overlap here, but I also have a few extras that are like kind of, all right, maybe I got to squint a little bit to see this one. And I actually have a feeling that I kind of have a strong feeling that we're going to end up nominating the same winner here. Because how this is going to go is, like Jorge said, we're going to go back and forth, secret list style between 2 to 3 backfields apiece, and then we will nominate 3 finalists, and we will vote on the winner because this is a very democratic podcast here. But before we do that, let's take a look back at last year's David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs and sort of how that season came to pass. Both these guys were top 15 overall running backs in fantasy. Jahmyr Gibbs was the running back 10. David Montgomery was the running back 13. Another certain NFL running back still owes me shaved eyebrows for the fact that that happened. He's going to be in training camp, right up the street here, so maybe I'll just show up one day with a razor. I don't know. Austin Ekeler, you're on notice, buddy. You are married. I promised I would not make you do it before you're married. You got married last month. It's time to pay up at some point. That's a different conversation. But anyway, so both these running backs were top 15 last year. Jorge, how did 2 running backs from the same backfield end up becoming both top 15 backs in fantasy? Let's just, again, take a look back and sort of the anatomy of that season.
Well, I mean, number one, they had one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. And they used him complementary really well because you had David Montgomery really that banger, and he got touchdown equity, so he was up in the double digit touchdowns and did so well. Jahmyr Gibbs was one of the best receiving backs out there last year. Just a wonderful player. I think he was third in the NFL in targets last year for running backs. Just one of the best players. One of the fastest players. That was one of the things that really struck me. And I remember when you and Austin broke down how and you broke down him specifically when he was still kind of figuring it out. And Austin knew what he saw, but that he was going to figure it out, but that he saw the tools. He saw what was what was going to come. And then he had 3 weeks in a row where he was like the RB3, RB2, and RB1, and just blew up from there. But no, a great complimentary. Jared Goff really used Jahmyr Gibbs very well, and that's why I think that he's he's going to go to the moon this year, and he's very worthy of being that number 1 draft pick. But I think we're going to get a little bit of a discount on David Montgomery right now, because I think people are expecting him to take a big step backward, and I don't think so. This is still that, you still got 5 big men up there who are going to be blowing holes open for them, and they've got everything. Okay, we're going to drink right now. The ecosystem is there perfect for him, because it's the same one as last year. You still got the same play caller. You still got the same quarterback. Amon-Ra St. Brown's still eating up targets. Sam Laporta's still there. And then these two are going to just slide right back into their same roles. And plus 14 out of 17 games indoors in the first 17 weeks. It's wheels up on these guys.
Yeah, I agree that I think Montgomery could end up being a pretty big value this year. He stands out when just like looking at early ADP and rankings as a guy that I think has way more ceiling than some of the players that go around him. But, looking back in last season, like you brought up a lot of good points there in terms of what we're looking for out of this type of backfield. Number one, it does have to be a really good ecosystem, I think. Like I'm definitely going to nominate some players that maybe are on teams that I'm not 100% convicted can be great, but they got to have a good, at least offensive and rushing ecosystem, right? I think that has to be a big thing here. You mentioned the offensive line. That's for sure a piece of it here. And I think the fact that these two guys do have complementary skill sets is another kind of requirement here. I think that it's got to be a backfield where we can see them be a thunder and lightning type of approach, or at least two guys that are going to give you different dimensions, right? Because in a way, it's interesting too, because I think the third thing that you brought up there too is that like the start to the season for David Montgomery. We end up looking back at like year-end fantasy numbers and kind of forgetting how we got there, right? And those first 6 weeks of the season, when Jahmyr Gibbs wasn't totally involved, he wasn't totally unleashed yet, when David Montgomery is putting up like 13, 11, 32, 18 points in the first 4 weeks. That's doing a lot to lift Dave Montgomery's year-end total. And it wasn't like he fell off completely out of the face of the earth, the last half of the season. But you look like week 14 on, it's 8.5, 8.2, 12.9, 12.5, 10 points, right? Like, so it wasn't quite the same high ceiling, but that was the weeks when Jahmyr Gibbs is going off. From week 10 on, Jahmyr Gibbs was, he was the sixth best back in fantasy. So you also kind of need to look at it that way too, that if you're going to get a situation like this, yes, we need a good offensive / rushing ecosystem, which we knew Detroit had. You also need two guys with complementary skill sets. And I also think you kind of need to tell yourself a story of if they're going to truly both be top 15, which is ultimately unlikely. But if you're looking for that type of upside, you almost need to have two guys that can have big pockets of the season, even if they don't always perfectly overlap.
Oh, absolutely. They're not both going to go off every week. And that's the thing that we got to keep in mind.
Yes.
But they could both score. There were plenty of weeks that both of these guys scored touchdowns, and that's gonna really boost a player on a player's fantasy line so much. And that's the thing. That's what I'm excited about. Why you guys invited me on for this show, because trying to find that kind of that tandem where you could still get value from those guys, because it's going to be easy to say Saquon Barkley. Is going to eat up targets. It's going to be, obviously Christian McCaffrey is going to be one of the, is going to be one of the target hogs all over. He's going off as the 101 in best ball drafts. But it's finding those guys where there's going to be value. And, I think some people are going to be surprised at some of the teams we bring up because there's going to be some value, from the second running back. our amigo JJ Zachariason loves to talk about the ambiguous backfields. Mm-hmm. These might qualify a little bit, but both these guys really, I think for the most part, the teams that the tandems that we're going to be talking about here, we're going to be able to find value in both of them, and they're going to be starter worthy. At the very least, one of them will be flex worthy in a fantasy lineup.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is that even if it is in pockets of the season, whereas like at the beginning of the year, David Montgomery was a clear cut every week must start, like you got to play this guy. And then Jahmyr Gibbs was sort of in that what the heck flex territory. And then by the end of the year, Jahmyr Gibbs was a player you were playing every single week. And then David Montgomery was sort of in that you're probably going to break ties in favor of playing him, but he's still more maybe towards that RB2 flex type of territory. Like that's sort of the type of thing we're looking for here. I think there is still clearly, to me, among all of the backfields I'm going to nominate, there's still probably one that I prefer over the other. There's still one guy I think will be that must start every single week, but it's the other guy that can give you usability. And by the way, we never actually quite saw it with this backfield, which is good because nobody wants to wish injuries. But that is another thing too, that when we're talking about these guys, that was, again, because in a way, it wasn't that Jahmyr Gibbs was hurt. It was just that he was a rookie and he was acclimating himself to the NFL field. He wasn't like fully maximized yet. And that's why Montgomery has these like monster touch totals to start the season. And that's sort of the thing we're going to look at with these backfields as well, is that not only are these guys that could potentially give you two players with standalone value, it actually could be a situation where it just, again, points to that high end upside if for whatever reason it only ended up being one of these players.
And one of the things to keep in mind about this backfield, these guys get used immediately, because I remember that David Montgomery sat out a game, and originally the talk was he's going to miss multiple weeks. And then I think it was like a Thursday night game. He missed a week and then came back in the next week and scored 3 touchdowns. Yeah. And I know for me, I sat him on a roster because I thought, oh, you know what? He's coming back way too quickly, but they're going to use these guys. So even if they miss these times, knock on wood, hopefully they don't miss any time. But I'm really hoping that I'm really keep minding the fact that if they do miss any time, they're going to just jump back and dive back into the pool immediately and just get going.
All right, so let's waste no more time. Let's get into some of our candidates here, Jorge. You get to go first. You're the guest. Give us your first candidate to be this year's David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs dynamite backfield duo where you can use both of these players in fantasy.
Well, I feel like it's low-hanging fruit on this one. Let's go down to South Florida, Miami. Devon Achane, or as Dr. Edwin Porras and I love to call him, Achane. Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert. They were already a spectacular tandem. You had Raheem Mostert. He was the RB2 on the season last year, was scoring 21 touchdowns, 18 rushing touchdowns. He was there in the last 30 years. There's only been 2 running backs age 30 or more to lead the NFL in rushing touchdowns, and he did it at age 31. He shocked the world out of that one. And then Achane, how many people sat him for that Denver game and just watched him go for 233 yards and 233 total yards.
How many rosters
touchdowns.
Was he on? How many waiver wires was he still out there on at that point?
I remember that week in the rookie report. He was not high. I don't think he was over 50%, but by the end of that week, I think he was up at around 80 or something like that. But we saw immediately how different his speed was and how he just found the openings, but he ended up number 4. But injuries came to play with him, just different things. He was the number 4 running back on the season with 16.1 fantasy points per game. So only played 11 games. But I think the way Mike McDaniel used the two of them is if again, we're using the if game, and one of my cousins love to say there's no if in fantasy football, but but if they could stay on the field, it's one. Though getting back to Edwin, he and I did an episode on the Injury Prone podcast. He has very serious concerns over Raheem Mostert's injury history. It's, for the lower legs, it's a lot. I mean, this was such an outlier season for him. He scored more touchdowns last season than in the rest of his career combined. And, but yeah, I mean, I think as long as he's on the field, you're definitely, you're starting both these guys.
I think they're a great candidate to nominate first because they check a lot of boxes that we're looking for here. For starters, it's a great rushing ecosystem. We know that last year, obviously, it produced this monster season for Raheem Mostert. It produced some monster weeks for Achane. They were 5th in rushing success rate, 5th in rushing EPA. And it is interesting. I'm glad you brought them up because I can't quite get my bearings on how I feel about this group as a unit, because like you look at early fantasy ADP, it's pretty clear how people feel about this. Like Achane's going to take over the show. He's a 20th overall player off the board in early best ball drafts. Like, you got to go way down. Like we're talking past Tony Pollard, Javonte Williams to get to Raheem Mostert as the 95th overall player off the board. I can't imagine that's actually going to hold up when we get to real drafts in August and like people that had Raheem Mostert on their fantasy team last year. I think he's going to, he's not going to go behind Javonte Williams. I just can't imagine that that's going to hold up forever. But for now, for this time being, that is what it is. So that indicates to me, Jorge, that everything you said about, which is true with Raheem Mostert, outlier year. He's not going to have that again. There is a severe injury history here. Early drafters are pretty much not just taking that into account, potentially even overemphasizing that to the point where he's fallen down to the 95th overall all player here. But I have to imagine that Achane is not, he doesn't really profile like any of these guys that are going high up in here. Like, I don't think he's going to have the same workload as like a Kyren Williams. I don't think he's going to have the same workload as like a Travis Etienne. Certainly not like a Derrick Henry, even, Josh Jacobs or Isaiah Pacheco, who go much later, right? So in like your mind's eye, how do you envision like the workload splitting out for these two guys to both give us usability out of both of these players? Well,
I think one of the growth aspects for Achane, I think is going to be, I think it's going to be in the passing game. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was somewhat of a factor, but I think he's going to become more of a factor there. So I think there's a growth. The thing, and I think he's going to be on the field more. He only had 4 games where he had a snap share over 50% out of 4 out of the 11 games that he appeared in. So I think just being on the field a little bit more is gonna help him. I mean, he's so explosive. I mean, his yards per attempt were 7.5 yards, which is ridiculous. That led all players with 100 plus carries, and the number 2 guy was Jaylen Warren, who was at 5.2. So I mean, he was almost lapping the field. But I think he's gonna have a little bit more. I don't know how much he's going to get up close. I think it might be Mostert getting some of the carries. So most of the carries inside in the red zone, and especially inside the 5. When you're talking, and when you talked about the ADP for Mostert, I mean, it's like if you get 8 games, 10 games out of him, I think you win that ADP at that point. Because basically you're looking at, if you go with a hero RB approach where you grab, let's say you grab one of the big 4 or 5 guys that in the first 2 rounds, and then you just wait on running back, and Raheem Mostert is maybe your 2nd or 3rd running back at that point. I'll take that discount. And I'll start him every week in that offense. In that ecosystem, we're drinking again. Sign me up, especially considering the fact that Miami was so explosive, especially in the first half of the season. So grab me some Mostert there at the end. Keep an eye on one guy, also Jaylen Wright.
Yeah.
He fits the suit, 4.33 on the 40. So, he could spell these guys, 2 guys, either guy with injury history. That's something that could be exciting.
That is potentially problematic though for our specific exercise, right? The fact that there could be a third player in the mix here, like we can't have that, right? I mean, I think you're right though, from like an injury standpoint. That's just one of the wild cards here that might prevent these two guys from having this type of season, right? Where both these guys are usable every single week, because we start to get a third player in the mix here in any backfield. This is the case. You start to get a third player in the mix, you're going to start depressing that ceiling and floor for everybody involved. But it might be smart from Miami's standpoint to do that because of the injury history with these two players. But again, you look back at this Lions example, there's no real like Craig Reynolds role, right? When everybody's healthy, he had a couple moments when people were injured, but like when everyone's healthy, there's no Craig Reynolds coming in here stealing 5 to 8 carries a game or something like that. But if that becomes Jaylen Wright, that could prevent these two guys from hitting this ceiling. But you're right that the big thing here is health, right? Because you look back at it, Jorge, from a per game standpoint. You said was your cousin who says like there's no if in fantasy football. Per game is also like, well, that is the big if of fantasy football. You look back per game, Raheem Mostert's running back 3, Achane is running back 4. So we've already seen these guys actually be able to do this, right? So I don't know. I think I'm good to wave them into the finalist group. It's just a group that I do have a tough time like figuring out how the workload is going to be distributed, because I don't necessarily think they both fit the sort of archetype of like one guy's the banger back early and then Achane is the space back, even though I think that like on paper it looks like that, but I do have my suspicions there.
No, in one of the things, I'm starting up a beat writer series and with NFL insiders on each team, and I'm gonna see if I could get some intel on how the Dolphins are going to use this guy. But man, I think it may be 55-45, or it may be pretty close to a 50-50 touch split between the two guys, which I think would still be exciting. I think as fast as these two are and as talented as they are, as long as they're on the field, I mean, if they're getting 10 to 15 touches, I'm starting anyone. I'm starting both of them easily.
All right, so that's our first nomination, and they go right to the finalist group here, the Miami Dolphins duo of Achane and Raheem Mostert. I think the second odds-on favorite to be this year's David Montgomery Jahmyr Gibbs is the guys that I'm going to nominate here, and they were right up there with Achane and Mostert to me. Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, I think, have to be nominated for this, because they do, I think, fit the archetype of what I was kind of struggling with the Miami group, in that we have a banger back in Najee Harris, who isn't a pure banger back to either. Like he's not he's not a total zero in the pass game. That's what people underrated, Jorge, with David Montgomery last year, is that like, oh, he was just going to cede all of that passing down work to, Jahmyr Gibbs. No disrespect to the great Jamal Williams, but that was the case, right, with Jamal Williams in Detroit, was that he was going to be completely uninvolved in the passing game, but that was never going to be the case with Montgomery. And I think that's key for Najee Harris too, that we've seen him be involved in the pass game in the NFL. He's not going to have to come off the field on obvious passing downs. It's not going to make the roles like way too pigeonholed and way too defined. And Jaylen Warren there on the flip side is definitely an electric space back. However, he's also a guy that I think we've seen be an effective early down runner. I mean, some people would argue, and I might be like one of those people, that he's actually been more impressive as just a pure runner than Najee Harris in the league. We know this team wants to run the ball. Arthur Smith is going to push to lead this team lead the league in rush attempts. Been saying that all summer. It's obvious. It's the case. He gave a long winding answer. Shout out to Coach Speak Index on Twitter who put this video out. Arthur Smith gave a long winding answer as like, who is the team's wide receiver 2, which of course people on Twitter were having fun with and all upset about because it's Arthur Smith. But basically my takeaway listening to that is, we don't know. We don't know who the wide receiver 2 is on this team, because it's still a very much an open question based on the skill set of all those players. They're going to establish the run. They're going to lean on both these guys. Another key point here that sells this group as the potential finisher to me, that like you mentioned with Detroit, great offensive line. Actually, that is a bit of a concern for Miami. That's a kind of a group that's still in flux and maybe an issue going into week 1 for Miami. Not so in Pittsburgh. They're already sort of investing into that group, and then this year they really doubled down on that, taking 2 rookies early in the draft to add to that offensive line, which was a group that I think played a lot better than expectations last year. So The only real concern I have with this group, Jorge, is obviously just the overall drink ecosystem. The passing game is it Russell Wilson? Is it Justin Fields? Like, how many touchdowns is this team going to score? They're definitely not going to be a Detroit Lions type of offense. Like, if you're just on paper saying you got to pick a backfield duo in Miami with that offense or Pittsburgh with this offense, I mean, I definitely think that there's more firepower available in Miami overall. However, I just really believe that this Steelers run game is going to be efficient. It's going to be a strong unit. And I think both of these guys can be potential every week starters in fantasy.
Yeah, they're going to lean into the running game. And by the way, a big surprise that Najee Harris, when coming up on a season where he could be playing for a contract,
True.
He decides to eat as clean as possible. I mean, you've been talking about your own your own eating journey this in the new year.
I'm sure Najee's doing a better job of it than me. By the way, I'm sure he's doing a better job than me.
But yeah, that he's almost fanatical about it. I mean, hey, you know what? Guys, that could be that little X factor that makes a little bit of a difference. But the big thing is going to be opportunity, and they're both going to get a lot of opportunities. And I think they both really like. Similar to Monty and Jahmyr Gibbs. I think these two have very good complementary skill sets, because Harris, he was number 5 in yards after contact last year with 808 yards. And last year, producer Colin all season kind of gave me a hard time about, Najee Harris as being one of my ride or dies last year, and how he was, not for most of the season, but then comes in week 17, championship week, whoever made it to the finals with him, he gave him 24.2 fantasy points with a couple touchdowns. So, but he's kind of he's going to take some of the tough yardage. But Jaylen Warren, he's such an explosive back. You do see the difference when they run. Where Warren, I think he took one one long run to the house during the preseason, and everybody just went nuts. But he carried it over 1,100 total yards, 6 touchdowns, but he had 61 catches on the season. So I think they're gonna. I hope they figure out that maybe he's not the number 2 receiver in this, but he's going to be definitely a pass catching weapon, along with Pat Freiermuth, kind of like in that short to intermediate side. And I know you've spent a lot of time on George Pickens lately. I heard the episode on reception perception that you had, that you were very conflicted on him, but still, there's going to have to be somebody to work alongside him, and that's going to be that running game and these two guys. But I think Warren is going to be someone who kind of helps in that intermediate, kind of like screens and maybe some short passes, and really just get him out in space and get him working against defenders. And I think, gosh, I'm trying hard not to get too excited about this offense, because I do think they can be better, because Russell Wilson has not been good, has not been great the last 2 years. He's not been Seattle Russell Wilson, but there's something about a Mike Tomlin team that just seems to figure it out. And I think a good running game with that defense is gonna really kind of like establish that mindset that kind of like imposing their will on another team. And I think that's they're going to need to do that, especially combining the running game and the defense.
Yeah, I think it's going to be the identity of their team, basically, is this run game. And I think they started to lean into that at the end of last year, which obviously getting Matt Canada out of the building, that was kind of the right decision for that offense for sure. I think everybody, other than Mike Tomlin, everybody knew that was the right thing for like multiple years, that like Matt Canada was not the guy to be the offensive coordinator here. That helped last year, but it also helped just saying, hey, we're not going to try to do this like whatever the hell that we're doing in the pass game. We're not leaning into that anymore. We're leaning into this ground game. Like, that is going to set the tone for this offense. I think that's only going to be emphasized this year. And everything they've done this offseason has told us that, from hiring Arthur Smith, from investing in the offensive line. And it is just interesting too. You bring up, Najee Harris and sort of like, I think he's almost gotten to be a little bit over criticized as a player, because he's been much better ever since Jaylen Warren's gotten in the mix here. Like, and I think a lot of it is just taking some of the burden off of him. Yeah. You look at his snap counts and his touch totals from early in his career when he was super inefficient. it doesn't look like that anymore, right? Like you just look back at the game log last year. It's like a bunch of games, like no games over 60% of the snaps, except the final week of the season. He's literally at 60%, and that was his highest. Other than that, it's a lot of like leading into that 57%, 34%, 44%, 53%, a lot of around that 50% mark, because Warren being there actually, I think, helps make him more efficient, which, by the way, total sidebar here. One of the dumbest, like there's always these dumb like coach narratives in fantasy sometimes, like Mike Tomlin, he rides one running back, right? There's always, well, it's like, okay, until there's another guy in there that deserves the touches too. Like when it is one guy that can handle all the work, like Le'Veon Bell, or Le'Veon Bell gets hurt, it's like, we'll just turn to D'Angelo Williams, who's been like a quality starter, or James Conner. Yeah, that happens. But then suddenly you've got a situation here where you've got two backs that need the ball. There's not just, Mike Tomlin's not an idiot, right? He's not going to be like, well, tough look, kid. Like, I'm just going to give all the touches to this one guy we drafted in the first round. And I think both these guys have been better for it. And I think that will be the case going forward. So to me, Jorge, yeah, they really stand out as, again, other than the fact that I have pretty big reservations about the passing game and just how potent this offense is going to be. I think this duo checks a lot of boxes in terms of they're a complementary skill set. I can see pockets of the season when one guy's the lead dog and then the other kind of changes. Like it can go back and forth like that. We think the run game is going to be good. The offensive line is going to be good. I think if you're okay with it, I think they are also another duo we have to kind of wave into the finalist bracket here.
Yeah, I think so. I can't see. I mean, that's going to be quite a final fight between even if we just have these two teams go through. I wanted to, you brought something up when you talked about the Steelers' identity, and it just kind of flashed back to a stat that I remembered. And this is going back to the Steel Curtain days. Franco Harris and Rocky Bleier both had 1,000-yard seasons during the Steel in the same season. So for I think it was 1976, one of their Super Bowl years, and so Scott Pianowski, you can fact check us on that. So, but I mean that to me, I mean that is one of the organizations, one of the fan bases that really relishes their history, and they should, because it's phenomenal the last 60 years what they've done, 50 plus years. But yeah, I mean if you can hark back to those guys, especially when one of your guys' last name is Harris, hey, why not leaning into it?
All right, well, let's take a quick break, and then let's see if we can find a duo that might actually be able to push these two guys in the finalist bracket right after this. All right, we're back. Jorge, give me your next nomination to be this year's David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs.
Well, it's our amigo who owes you his eyebrows, and Austin Ekeler and Brian Robinson Jr. You know what? There's, I think, a lot of people in the fantasy community. I had to talk someone down off of this who said that that Austin was washed. I'm like, no, he's not washed. I'm like, he was playing with an ankle injury, and that is the hardest thing to do during an entire season. And he still got over 1,000 yards. And let's remember, this is a guy who was the RB1 2 years ago. So, and caught a ton of passes, and this is going to be, I think, and then Brian Robinson Jr. I mean, also he's kind of like, I mean, the way we were just talking about Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. They kind of both fit the same archetype, where Brian Robinson Jr. is the banger back, the stronger runner. Though I saw a video on Twitter yesterday where one of the coaches I think it was the running backs coach, was talking about Brian Robinson Jr. as a receiving back. But we'll see about that. I mean, he had decent numbers. I don't think he's going to be quite as good as maybe someone in the Cliff Kingsbury offense, James Conner, was a couple years ago when they were together. But Brian Robinson Jr. has, very much very much kind of like the bigger back, and Austin, I think, as long as Jaden Daniels doesn't just tuck it and run it all the time when he gets under pressure, dumps it off. But I mean, they should be able to scheme some stuff open for Austin, because he's such a talented receiver. And getting the ball in space. So, and the other part about it is, I don't think their defense is going to be very good. So yeah, I think they're going to need to, like, all hands on deck on the offensive side. So Yeah, I mean, we could go. I'll let you go up the road and tell Austin that after he has to shave his eyebrows, he also has to give us a great running back tandem.
I considered them. I ultimately did not have them in my group of nominations because I think you made several good points there about the fact that the skill sets are complementary. And I actually think that Brian Robinson, who had 43 targets last year, 36 catches, he could fit into that David Montgomery, Najee Harris sort of bucket of like, he's a non-zero in the pass game. He's going to be able to play on more downs than we think. That does sort of, I think that's good, but I also think that runs me into a bit of an issue here of like, I have a tough time seeing this backfield producing two usable guys. I feel like one of these guys is going to end up being a value at ADP because right now nobody really wants to draft either of them, right? Like Brian Robinson, running back 35, 107th overall player off the board. Austin Ekeler is not too much higher, running back 31, 101st overall player. And I don't really have a lot of conviction about which one I actually think is going to be better this season because I don't know how you could have any conviction on that kind of going into training camp and anything like that because, there's a chance that like Austin comes in and he's rejuvenated and he's, ready to rock in like kind of a different run scheme that, he's with Anthony Lynn, who he has a lot of history with. Right. And that's a great thing. I like the way they've designed run games in Arizona under Cliff Kingsbury before. Like he could come in and be rejuvenated and then like Brian Robinson's kind of a change of pace banger back. Although there's another situation where Austin comes in and like he's definitely better than what he was last year because he's healthy, but he's not quite the same old Austin Ekeler because hey, age comes for us all, right? Father time is undefeated. And then Brian Robinson, who I do think is pretty underrated and is a nice running back, he could just end up being the guy that they want to lean on a little bit more, and it becomes kind of like a messy 70-30, maybe 65-35 type split. That's the only thing that's like kind of holding me back from thinking both of these guys could be viable because I do see why they can be a nice complementary committee. And also, I didn't even mention the fact that like I don't like this offensive line at all. And that's another issue. Just like, again, sort of how good do we expect this offense to be in Washington in year one of Jaden Daniels and Cliff Kingsbury?
No, and that's the one thing though. How you feeling about Terry McLaurin with Jaden Daniels?
I mean, I want to feel so good. I want to feel really, really good.
I want good things for him.
I just want, man, another shout out to Coach Speak Index. I saw the video they posted of Dan Quinn talking about like Terry McLaurin and just how he works. And I'm like, God, if you're listening, one time, let me just get one Terry McLaurin season like we know he's capable of. And like, I still think there's more with Dotson than we saw last year. And I guess to your point about Ekeler as a receiver, there's a drop off though after that. Like we'll see if De'Ami Brown can be anything more than a depth piece. Like I think Luke McCaffrey's, potentially a nice underneath slot receiver, but on film, I didn't see too much more than that. Zach Ertz is going to do the Zach Ertz thing where he probably suppresses Benson this year. But still like doesn't give you a lot of needle moving play. So there, outside of McLaurin, there's a dearth of pass catching options, which could be good for Ekeler. But the fact that Robinson might mix in the pass game, I think might keep, and the fact that Jaden Daniels is a scrambler, I think might keep Ekeler below like I could see a nice like 55 catch season for him, which would be nice for Washington, but maybe not for fantasy necessarily.
Well, I mean, hopefully, if he has 55 catches, he would have to have north of 175 rushing attempts to really be fantasy viable. But I tell you, I mean, it's for me, it's been hard to pass him up, when you, in best ball drafts, when it's that, when you get to that, pick 100 or something like that, and he's staring at you, and then I see some of the other names, and I'm like, well, you know what? Maybe shoot for the upside on the possibility that he's still got that he's still holding off Father Time for at least another year or two. Hopefully, because we need more Austin Ekeler in the NFL, more good Austin Ekeler both on the field and off the field, because Eckler's edge is chef's kiss.
100%. Like I think that one running back comes out of this backfield and ends up being a value, but I'm a little skeptical that both of them can do it. So I think we leave them on the cutting room floor for now and don't push them to the finalists just because I'm more skeptical of this. So, again, Austin, if you're listening, my bad, bro, but you still need to shave your eyebrows. So give me a break. Okay, let's talk. I'll give you another nomination here. And this one I'm not very convinced about either. Zack Moss and Chase Brown in Cincinnati. Jorge, I don't know if they made your list, but
they did.
And they're similar in that they're kind of in that Washington bucket for me, where I actually think that only one running back comes out of here. So maybe they don't make our finalist group, but we've got Zack Moss, who shows a little bit of everything, solid early down runner, good pass protector, is viable in the pass game. And then Chase Brown's this guy who, definitely kind of popped in some more designery ways, right? Like screen passes, stuff like that. He had a clear runway on some of these, but he, to his credit, cashed in on big plays. Also, though, this is a ecosystem we should want to get right. If ultimately it is just one running back, I think you want to try to pick the right one. My lean has definitely been towards Zack Moss early, but I could certainly see a Miles Sanders, Chuba Hubbard situation here where we get obsessed with a new guy, contract, all that stuff. And then, the incumbent just ends up beating him out, which is what happened with Chuba Hubbard last year in Carolina. If for whatever crap Colin gives you about being on Najee Harris, I was definitely in on Miles Sanders last year. So give me a break. What a disgusting, despicable call that was. So back to Cincinnati. Quickly forget about that, listener.
Yeah, let's get back to Cincinnati.
Let's get back to the present. Let's not dwell on the past. Let's stick with the present. This is an offensive line that they've invested in consistently with big guys who can, kind of set the tempo in the run game. And I think just if Joe Burrow's healthy, it's going to be a good offense. So while I'm kind of waffling if I think both of these running backs can be usable, it's definitely a backfield that I think is worth nominating if it ends up being a committee type situation.
And who's going to stack eight men in a box when you got Ja'Marr Chase on one side and T Higgins on the other side? Come on, you can't do that. You got to spend so much time on Ja'Marr Chase. So I look at that one, and and you talk about ecosystem. So it's and you got one of the top 5, maybe top 3 quarterbacks in the NFL, Joe Burrow, when he's healthy. Please be healthy. Right now, it's looking like he's going to have a normal training camp. And by the way, Edwin is really, really confident in how that recovery is going to go for him. So let's feel good about that offense. But two guys that really complement each other. Zack Moss really, really banger back. When he came off, remember, he missed week 1 last year, coming back from a broken forearm. Weeks 2 to 5, before Jonathan Taylor was more integrated into the offense, he was the RB4 during that point. And he had, and when everybody rushed to start Jonathan Taylor in week 5, when he came back, he had only a handful of touches. And Zack Moss had 32.5 fantasy points on the week with 195 total yards and 2 touchdowns. So he's another guy. These guys are, he's in the 90s. One thing that I was pretty surprised because when I put these two guys on my potential list, I was kind of shocked at how similar in size they are. They're both 5'10". And I thought Chase Brown was a lot smaller, but Moss is listed at 215. Brown is listed at 211. But I think they're both really, they both really complement each other well. Brown is that home run hitter type of guy. He only had 5 touches going into December of last year. So they really did not utilize him much. Joe Mixon was very much, a touch hog on there, and he had big plays in there. In week 13, he had a 31-yard run where he had 9 touches for 61 yards. Week 14, he had a 54-yard reception. So he's, somewhat of a threat coming out of the backfield. This could be, and we trust Zack Taylor as a play caller. So I think this is going to be a fun offense. And I think people may be sleeping on this backfield. And I think these guys, Brown, I think is going to be more of a, explosive guy who's going to have his big weeks when he pops off a long run. But I think Moss will be more of the week to week guy that you can trust having 12 to 15, 16 carries and eating up some yardage. But yeah, I mean, sign me up for any chunk, any part of this offense, when you're getting guys, after pick 90. And yeah, why not?
Yeah, I think I'm in on taking shots with this offense. The only thing I think that holds me back from saying they're going to be a finalist is that, and I'm the one that nominated them. So the only thing I think that holds them back from potentially both being like, every week starts is the fact that Detroit, last year's example, is 25th in neutral pass rate. Like the run game is a clear identity point of that offense. Whereas and same thing with Miami, even though they're much higher in neutral pass rate. The Bengals last year led the NFL in neutral pass rate at 64.6%. And that was without Joe Burrow healthy. As long as Burrow's healthy, like the identity of this offense is going to flow through Burrow and Chase and Higgins and, these other pass catchers there. I think we'd need probably a pretty extreme receiving season out of one of them to really get both of these guys in the top 15. And again, that's sort of my sticking point here. Is that I think Moss and Brown can both be used in different ways in the pass game, which sort of kind of, I think, has me pausing about moving to the finals list. But what do you think? Do you think moving them to the finals list or want to consider some more options here?
I think we consider some more options. I think they're on the cusp. Okay. I think they're on the cusp just because of that offensive ecosystem.
All right. Give me another nomination here, Jorge.
I'm flipping a coin right now because I got two that I'm thinking about. But I'm going to go to Tennessee.
Okay.
Just on the Tyjae Spears and Tony Pollard. I think and Tony Pollard told you he wasn't right until week 11. And I looked in weeks 11 to 14, he was the RB7 in fantasy points. So he still had over 1,000. I mean, people make it seem like Tony Pollard was yes, he did not live up to he did not break fantasy football. He did not pay off ADP last year, but he still got 1,000 rushing yards. And, playing largely in, without being 100% healthy, with the injury that happened during the playoffs. And he still was, 76 targets and that's still number 7 in the NFL. He had, the other thing that shocked me was he was number 10 in yards after contact last year. So it was 764. So which really kind of, surprised me on that one because really just, the narrative around him was that he's not, that he really took a step backward last year. But I mean, gosh, he's a guy that's going late. Tyjae Spears, he started to become more of a weapon at the end of the season out of the passing game. He had 4 out of 6 games where we had at least 6 targets in those games. And so and had some explosive runs. He had kind of like mixed the rushing and the receiving. He had 88 total yards in week 13. He had in week 14, he went over 100 yards total, had 89 receiving yards in that week. Week 18, I know we don't count it, but for fantasy, but still he had two TDs, 1 rushing, 1 receiving with 66 total yards. So he kind of like came on at the end. So it's the only question mark I have is, I have 2. Brian Callahan coming from the Zack Taylor, coaching tree and the McVay coaching tree, but they like to pass, just like we were talking about with Cincinnati. I mean, they were one of the more pass heavy teams last year. And do they take that ethos and take it down to Tennessee? But it has me thinking. I mean, I'm following the money with the fact that they spent some money on Tony Pollard and made sure that they had two backs. Maybe they rotate him a little bit. The other question was the offensive line, but they invested in it in the NFL draft. They invested in it by bringing in Bill Callahan, who Nate Tice just sings his praises to no end about how much of a difference maker he can be as an offensive line coach. So. I'm kind of like I'm hopeful that Will Levis kind of elevates this offense to the point that both these receivers and both these running backs could be viable this season. My
hang up is sort of the identity of the team. Same thing here, which is I think I think they want to push the ball through the air, but like want to and being able to are two different things, right? Because a lot of it's going to come down to Will Levis. Like, yeah, they've set him up for success with DeAndre Hopkins coming back. I think people are starting to watch back and be like, oh, DeAndre Hopkins is actually pretty good last year, and yeah, I think there was this narrative that he was washed coming out of Arizona, and he was definitely not washed. Like he's maybe not the same DeAndre Hopkins from his prime years, but like no kidding, he's still a very viable, I think, fringe number one receiver, which is sort of what I'd say of Calvin Ridley. Like he's kind of a fringe number one, high end number two receiver. So you've got two viable starters there at receiver. You've also got some depth with like Tyler Boyd, and they don't seem to want to talk about Traylon Burks, but he's still on the roster, of course. Chig Okonkwo is coming back at tight end. I kind of think they want to be a pass first team, but that might still lead them back to, hey, while we're getting Will settled in this new offense and kind of changing up the picture a little bit for him, let's rely on these two running backs. Like they have depth at that position. The only thing I get hung up on with these two guys, and I've said this a lot, is just I feel like their skill sets overlap a little bit. So they're another one where I don't necessarily see like the clear, this is our early down back and this is our passing down back, which doesn't mean that both of them can be viable in fantasy. That's just like my one hang up with these two guys.
This could be one of those kind of like tandems where it's like, okay, this is your series, Tyjae. Okay, Tony, this is your series, and kind of rotate them to kind of become a little bit. I mean, this isn't like, we've heard of quarterbacks rotating in the 70s, and that didn't work. But I think to keep these guys really, really working together and actually healthy, kind of like what we were talking about with Najee and Jaylen Warren, maybe by, kind of like capping both of them at about 200 touches, maybe you maximize what they're going to bring to the table during the season and maximize their production over the course of 17 games.
Yeah, they're a little bit similar to when I nominated Moss and Brown, where I feel like we got to get this backfield right, but I don't think the answer is necessarily going to be both of them. So I'll throw one more out there that I actually feel pretty good about.
I'm curious.
And then I think we can get one from you as well. Although I have if you don't say this other one, I might throw a sneaky one out there too. But okay, Arizona Cardinals, James Conner and Trey Benson. I think that I've said this a lot where weirdly have talked about the Cardinals too much. And like you mentioned, the episode we did with Nate Tice, where we talked about the Cardinals run game is a very underrated unit. 7th in rushing EPA, 12th in rushing success rate. They were very high in terms of explosive run rate. They did some good stuff on the ground last year. I think that in my mind, I've been focused very much on Trey Benson and when does he take over. And he just looks like the profile of the running back you want to bet on, right? Pretty underrated rushing ecosystem, explosive rookie, sort of the upside of the unknown. But like Jorge, what if the answer is both? Like, what if I'm making the same mistake I was kind of trying to lead people not to make last year, which is, that veteran, cool. Get him out of the way. Let's bring the young guy in here. What people were doing with Jahmyr Gibbs last year and David Montgomery. What if we talk about pockets of the season? The early part is the James Conner part, Conner perfectly fits the David Montgomery archetype. Good early down back, guy who can, kind of bang on those run plays, but he's functional in the pass game, even more than functional at times during his career. And then Benson, I think also he's not Jahmyr Gibbs as a pass catching threat, although Gibbs was not like fully unleashed really as a pass catcher. I think there's actually still some more upside there, but he can give you some juice in the pass game, and he is like a pretty good early down runner himself. Like there's room for both of these guys to thrive in multiple roles. And I think that, Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. are going to get the headlines and the attention, but I think this is a group that wants to rely on its ground game, a coaching staff that wants to emphasize that running game. I didn't really think about them until kind of like the last few minutes of prepping for this podcast was like, why can't look, with all of this flip the script nonsense that we're doing here, it is kind of like, is it an exact carbon copy? No. But if we're thinking about the template of one guy is David Montgomery and one guy is Jahmyr Gibbs, and both of them could actually give you starting weeks in fantasy this year, I could see James Conner being the David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs being played by Trey Benson this season.
Plus, they also really invested in the offensive line too. So
true.
They've in the draft and everything like that. So I mean, just reinforce those guys up front. I look at that one, and you're right about it being pockets, because James Conner has missed games, and
True.
he does have that injury history that's troublesome. It could be one of the kind of like what we were talking about with Mostert early. I mean, you just kind of like ride him until and hope that he has a big season. But you got the rookie that you just kind of work in. I like this tandem because what you said, because I liked Benson a lot, and I can't see them just kind of like having him, having Connor in a true bell cow role. I could see, kind of like it could be maybe starting the season like a 65-35 split, getting Benson a little bit more acclimated, getting a little bit, they always talk about you need to get on the field as a rookie running back in your pass protection. So maybe he gets a little bit better in that regard. But I mean, it could by the end of the season be more of an even split. And if for some reason Connor's injury history catches up, Trey Benson could be a guy who could be a league winner if somehow he is unleashed as a full-on bell cow back. But still, I mean, even if he's getting 10 to 12 touches a week, yeah, I mean, I want him in a flex spot on a roster, and especially going where he's going in drafts. Yeah, I mean, he's a big discount right now because people aren't drafting him to thinking that he could see the field anytime soon.
Yeah, like he wasn't a first-round pick. He's not as dynamic as Jahmyr Gibbs, but I think it could follow a very similar path where, like you said, early in the season, it's maybe 60-40 in favor of the veteran there and James Conner. And like he ends up looking like the real value at running back 25 in early drafts. James Conner is like, he could be that early value. But then, and Trey Benson sort of in that what the heck flex type of territory that Jahmyr Gibbs was early in the season. And then by the end of it, though, it's flipped. And then the 60 is Trey Benson and the 40 is James Conner. Because that's the beautiful thing about why I really like this, is that like, unlike in Zack Moss and Chase Brown, like I kind of think it has to be one of these guys. In Tennessee, I kind of think it has to be one of these guys. In Washington, I think it has to be Robinson or Ekeler. I think I have a kind of a tough time seeing where like both of these guys are really viable, because I think the rushing ecosystem is going to be better. And I know this sounds like a hot take. It's going to be better in Arizona than any of those three teams I just listed off. But like James Conner's not going away. That's the thing, is that like if he's healthy, yeah, if injuries, of course, like Benson can take over. But if he's healthy and available, he is going to have some kind of role, just like Montgomery did. So I don't know. The more I talk about it, the more I think about it. I actually really like them as a finalist. What do you think? Are we good to move them in, or do we? I would still like, if you have a couple other options, I want you to throw them out.
I mean, I really like them. I hadn't really considered them, but I mean, the more you think about it, there's a reason why they fit into that finalist group. Plus, the other part is they get 4 games against the Rams and the Seahawks. 2 defenses that were among the most porous run defenses by the end of the season last year, and the Rams lost Aaron Donald. So plus they got Week 17 the Rams and the Cardinals, for those best ball geeks who are going nuts. I think that's gonna be a video game. That's gonna be Madden. I think it's gonna be Kyler Murray and Matthew Stafford just going one-on-one and just elevating both offenses in like a 42-38 game. But no, you look at these guys. I think they're going to be a fun group. I think they're going to be a fun tandem to kind of see where they're going to go, because they're going to get used. And I mean, you talked about it, that the way they built that offensive system, and how the running scheme. I think it's going to be yes. Let's get them in the finals.
All right, cool. So we have 3 finalists. Any others you want to throw out as dark horse candidates here before we vote on the 3 finalists?
The only one, and similar to this one, is Buffalo Bills, James Cook,
yep.
and
like
Ray Davis. That one, I mean, James Cook, he had himself he had a wonderful season last year. I mean, he had over 1,100 yards rushing and over 400, and had 445 receiving yards on the season. Not much used in the red zone, because why not? You got Josh Allen who's going to get those. But Ray Davis also was a very good, older prospect. By the way, great kind of like human interest story that he is. If anybody's seen the article that Zack wrote in The Athletic, it's going to tug at your heartstrings, just what this kid had to come through. And a rushing and receiving threat. I mean, a bigger back than James Cook, but yeah, I mean, he's a two-way threat that really could do some damage. Decent offensive line, and of course you got Josh Allen, so they're not going to stack the box because you got Josh freaking Allen that you got to contend with on every down.
I like that. I think that's a good dark horse name. I'll throw one more out there that I actually kind of think I wish I had made a stronger argument for is Kyren Williams and Blake Corum. Again, I think that the common knowledge, Jorge, or like the consensus view of it is like, again, similar to what we said with Pittsburgh, Sean McVay always rides one running back, right? Like it's going to be one or the other. Well, what if they get to camp and they're just like, remember all that stuff we said about how we love Blake Corum because he's so much like Kyren Williams? Well, we get to camp and like these guys are pretty close. It could end up being a split or some form of a split. And they definitely are. McVay's right. They're very samey, where they're both kind of like viable in the pass game, but they're probably more like early down backs. But I just think this team is going to run the piss out of the ball. Same, not quite to the degree of Pittsburgh. They're going to be a much better passing game than Pittsburgh, but they were only 12th last year in neutral pass rate. And I actually think that could be even a tick lower because, like, you look at the way they've invested this offseason, it's been in the offensive line. It's been on a third round running back when they already had a really nice starter last year in Kyren Williams. They didn't add like another receiver. It's going to be Puka Nacua and you know what Cooper Kupp can give you and a bunch of complementary players beyond that. So I actually kind of think they might be worth considering, but I don't know. I kind of wish I had made a stronger argument for them because the more I think about it, the more it could be like, hey, what if just both of these guys are fantasy starters?
And I kept them off because I didn't want to be a Ram homer, but I mean, what you just said, and you add in the fact that they really invested in the interior and the offensive line. And Steve Avila is their new center, and he's just going to be he's going to. I mean, him and the two guards are just going to blow holes open for these guys. And I mean, there was a part of me that was kind of like, at first it was like, Kyren Williams, ride him till the wheels fall off, but maybe Blake Corum makes sure the wheels don't fall off.
Exactly. That's what it comes back to for me is that I think similar to Najee Harris that. Like less is maybe more for Kyren Williams. Yeah, I kind of wish we had considered them. I don't know. I kind of wish we'd push them as a finalist, but I don't know. It is a little. I'll tell you what. I like them a lot more than Zach Moss and Chase Brown, who I talked about earlier. But I don't know. Do you feel any conviction about moving them as a 4-person finalist, or do we want to just leave it with the guys we have for now?
I think. I'm going to be a homer and say, let's put let's sneak them in there.
I like
just to see, because it's you made an incredible argument for it.
All right, so then we've got 4 backfields or duos as our finalists here. We've got Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert, Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, James Conner and Trey Benson, and Kyren Williams and Blake Corum. So Jorge, again, I'm going to let you go first. Put those in order 1 to 4. Most and least likely, just most likely to least likely to be this year's David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs.
I'm going to start with Miami, and I'm kind of eeny meeny miny mo between. I think I'm going to go Pittsburgh second, Rams third, and Arizona fourth. In a real, gosh, it's really a close race at 2, 3, 4.
All right, so I'm definitely not gonna make this any easier. I'm gonna go with Pittsburgh 1. I'm gonna go Harris and Warren as number 1. I'm gonna go Mostert and Achane number 2, and I think I'll go Benson and Conner because I really like that one the more I think about it, and then I'll go Rams 4. So that leaves us with a straight tie. So I guess producer Colin in the chat, you let me know who are we actually moving on here between the Miami and Pittsburgh backfield. You get to break the tie. All right, so drum roll. Colin is voting for Miami. I first episode here, I lose. So that feels good. Okay, so your winner this year's David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. It's the chalk based on ADP. It is, well, sort of, because Raheem Mostert's going so late. It's Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert. All right. And then look, I get it. Colin says he is not picking a Russell Wilson led team. And you know what? I respect that. So I think that's fair enough. So, Jorge, I think we've laid out pretty well how this backfield can both succeed together. And I think it's a unique enough offense, which Detroit is a unique offense. Miami even more so, maybe. It's a unique enough offense where I think this could happen.
I think you're right. I mean, in a sense, it already has kind of happened. If you look at fantasy points per game for Achane and the over RB2 overall for Mostert, it's just going to be health. It's just going to be health. Keep the guys on the field, please. Keep the guys on the field, and keep Edwin to not have to be so busy. When figuring out all the what to do with all the injuries and everything like that. So yes, stay on the field, please, guys.
Love it. Either way, I think we both definitely kind of concluded that Raheem Mostert, pretty decent value right now. And I think these guys could actually finish pretty close to each other, which maybe they both won't finish top 15. But it's, like I said, unique enough offense where it could happen. All right. We have our first winner. Jorge, appreciate you doing this episode, man. Anything you're working on right now that the people can check out?
Well, two things that I'd love for people to check out. The number one, the Injury Prone podcast that Dr. Emporas and I co-host. Like I said, I try and be James Coe, and he's definitely Matt Harmon. So the way you guys do on the Reception Perception podcast, but we've been going through all the injuries, guys who had season-ending injuries last year, kind of like what their prognosis is for the year ahead. We've gone position by position, so we're doing about an episode a week and keeping them kind of short, about 25 minutes long, so people can really, a dog walk or something like that. But yeah, subscribe on the YouTube channel. And I'm just kicking off my NFL Insider series where I'm talking to, 32 for 32. I've done it the last 3 years. People really loved it. Talking to a beat writer, podcaster, someone on the inside with every one of the 32 NFL teams. And I got a lot of questions. And I can't wait to go to Green Bay just to find out how to establish the pecking order of that receiver room.
Yeah, we've got a lot of questions that need answering. I love that one as a call out for sure. I'm definitely going to be checking out that series. So make sure you subscribe to Jorge's YouTube channel. You subscribe to the Injury Prone podcast. Jorge, you're the man. Appreciate you doing this. That is going to do it. We're going to be back next Tuesday, continuing our Flip the Script series by looking at who is going to be this year's Houston Texans. That is an electric topic all in and of itself. Until then, we're out.